Well, hi, BookTube. Bill Ruttenberg here with the Ruttenberg Library. This morning, I wanted to bring you, finally, my year in review on everything that I read in the year 2021. Now that that year is finally over, I meant to get this video out like several days ago, last Friday, but we had family come into town from all over the nation. We had somebody from Alaska, somebody from Colorado, somebody from Texas, and somebody from Missouri. And so we had our family all kind of converge on our house. And so when all of the little cousins get together, there is no quiet time in this house. So I hope you will forgive me on my tardiness in the video, but better late than never, right? So again, this is my year in review of the year 2021 and everything that I read during that year. I wanted to give you just some overall statistics on how my reading year went. I've listened to several of these videos over the last couple weeks, and I think the common theme for everybody was this reading year stunk. And for me, I don't know if I totally agree. Mine was an average to good reading year, and I don't think I have such, all of the negative feelings that everybody else had. I had the opportunity of dipping into some new genres for the first time, or at least extending my reading in some new genres, and so that was a really nice experience this last year. I set what I think, at least I've been recording my book reading like since 2017. I've had a Google Doc running on every book that I've read, and so with that recording, of course, my reading goes back a lot farther than that. But since 2017, since that's the date that I got to work with, this I believe is the year that I have read the most books. Now, there are reasons for that, and I'll get into that in just a second. But anyway, I wanted to share some of those statistics, and I also wanted to give you my top 5 fiction reads for the whole year, and then my top 10 nonfiction. Now, I always do 5 fiction because typically in a normal year, I don't read a whole lot of fiction. It's about a quarter of my reading. It's only about 25%, and in some years, it's even less than that. And then in most years, 75% of my reading is nonfiction. Now, this is one of those really odd years. Things got totally, literally flip-flopped. So for the year 2021, I read a total of 82 books. Now, for me, that's quite a bit. You have to understand that, like a lot of you, I lead a busy life. I teach, I coach, and I got a 4-year-old at home. And so, reading time is very sacred, and I got to be careful not to waste that, and because I just don't have a lot of it. And so I tried this year. Like I said, this was not a total bust on reading years, because this year I really tried to make sure that I was not wasting any time whatsoever. Every spare moment I had, or almost every spare moment I had, I devoted it to reading. So I like to watch a little TV too. I got to be honest. I like movies. I like watching baseball, football games, stuff like that. And this year, I took a whole lot of time away from those areas to dedicate it back to reading. And I think that's one of the reasons that my book total got up to 82 books. So here's the breakdown on that. I did some math, and here we go. So 10 of those 82 books were rereads. The smallest book that I read was 58 pages. I read Sarah, Plain and Tall. I don't think I had ever read that. It's a classic Hallmark movie, and one of the things I've been trying to do is go back to those middle grade. Now, I know that one's actually probably a 3rd grade level book, if that, but it was just a classic that I could not remember reading, so I just went back and read that. But I did read Sarah, Plain and Tall. But on the flip side of that, the biggest book I read all year was Under the Dome by Stephen King, and it was 1,074 pages. So it was a bit of a chunky monkey. So I've got both ends of the spectrum on the size of the books that I read. Now, in a typical year, I usually read more towards the 500 or more, 500 pages or more books. Those are very typical for me. And that's why my numbers usually aren't like super duper high like some people's. But like I said, this year I've been reading. I dedicated a lot of this year's reading to reading some middle grade books because I'm a middle school teacher and I like to have that conversation with the kids. And over the last couple years, I realized that I had not read middle grade books for quite a while. And so my language arts teacher gave me, kind of a big old stack of books to go through. And I had been going through those in the first half of the school year. I'd been kind of just going through those left and right. And so that is a reason. That's another reason my book totals went up, because middle grade books obviously are not on a higher level. They're on a middle grade level. There's still good reads. There's still good messages in them, but you can read through them pretty quick. You can basically destroy them in an afternoon or two, depending on how fast a reader you are. So that was one thing I dedicated time to. This last year, I also I participated in March Mystery Madness, and I read a bunch of mysteries. And, they're all 150, 200 pages, a lot of them. And I found a couple of authors that I liked, and I destroyed them during the month of March. At least for me, anyway, it was destroying them. And I read quite a few there, and that boosted my numbers as well. If we look at the overall breakdown of my books, I read, and like I said, this is the first time this has ever happened. It's like a total flip-flop reversal of what my normal reading patterns are. But I read 54 fiction, and I read 28 nonfiction, which, like I said, very abnormal for me. It's usually the other way around. If you're interested in statistics, I went ahead and did statistics. I don't usually do this. I try to do it maybe at the end of the year, but I don't do it like on a month-by-month basis like some. I read a total of 24,624 pages this last year, and if you divide that by the 82 books, it's about an average of 300 pages per book. My fiction books were 14,776 of those pages, and if you divide that by 54, it comes out to about 273 pages per book. And then my nonfiction was 9,848 pages. Divide that out by 28 books, and it comes out to about 351 pages per book. As I said, that's only if you're interested. I don't usually do all the stats. I do like stats, though. But I saw some stats on some other people's, and it was more just me being curious of what mine were. So I went and figured those up. So as I said, I usually don't read as many fiction. So I usually do like a top 5 fiction and then top 10 nonfiction. So I just went ahead and kept that trend, even though I read a whole bunch more fiction than nonfiction. So anyway, the nonfiction that I read were really, really good. It really wasn't all that hard to figure out, what was the best. It kind of sorted itself out. But let's do the top 5 fiction books of 2021. Now, keep in mind, I read a lot of backlist stuff. I shop at used bookstores, and so these are not like necessarily new titles. Excuse me. So these are just new books to me in 2021. So number 5 was a middle grade book. It was called Forge. And by the way, some of these were at school, some of these are at the public library, and I don't have them right here with me, so sorry I don't have it to show. But anyway, the first one, number 5 on the list, was Forge by Lori Halse Anderson, and this is about the setting of the story was during the Revolutionary War. It's about a slave who escaped slavery, at least for a short time period, and it's about his time at Valley Forge. And it was very, very good. It really gets into the life and the predicaments that a slave in the North, or a former slave in the North, what they could go through. And so I thought that was a really good book. I have the first one sitting on the pile at school to read. The first book in this series, Forge, is book number 2. Number 4 on my list of top fiction books was Murder at a Vineyard Mansion by Philip R. Craig. Now, during March Mystery Madness, I discovered Philip R. Craig and his Vineyard Mysteries. I loved them all. I thought they were a lot of fun. They're definitely like palate cleansers. They're not hard to understand. They're easy to follow. Fun storyline, and you could have taken, really honestly, any of the Vineyard Mysteries that I read during March, and I think I continued that into April a little bit. You could have taken any of those and put it here at the number 4 spot. I just took the very first one that I read, which was, like I said, Murder at a Vineyard Mansion, and it's about a murder at a vineyard mansion, and we've got a cast of characters, and he takes you. Philip R. Craig takes you through the storyline, and your main character is basically solving the murder. Nothing, no rocket science here. It's a basic murder mystery. Number 3 was Under the Dome. I finished that one towards the end of the year there, or mid-December. That was by Stephen King. I thought it was a good book, good storyline, or at least about 1,025 pages of it. You could have, there's about 50 pages. It talks about how the dome actually got put in place, and I really did not like that part. But the other 1,025 pages, I liked the storyline, and it really reminded me, well, basically the setting of the story is this small town in Maine, and all of a sudden this dome or force field is set all the way around the town. It traps all of the citizens that were there at the time. Some were lucky and they were not in towns. A lot of them were unlucky and they were actually in town. And you can't get in or out of the town limits, and it basically traps them. It puts them in almost a survival mode. It really reminds me of Lord of the Rings a little bit, and it goes through what human nature is like, and you've got people who side towards evils, people that side towards good, and it's a battle of good versus evil. And it was a really good book. I enjoyed it. I know not everybody likes it. I think Stephen King's one of those like him or hate him type authors. I tend to like Stephen King books. So for me, this was number 3 on the list. Also the largest book I read all year. Number 2 on my list of best books of the year for fiction was The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. And I have been singing this book's praises since the beginning of 2021 when I finished the book. It was fabulous. And when I say it's a good book, I'm not saying the storyline is very depressing, really, but it's a book about this small family, a husband, wife, and a daughter. The husband has come back from Vietnam. He suffers from PTSD. He's a drunk. He's violent. But he's also got these lapses he's got these times when he goes back to normal, and he's a loving father. And, like the daughter really enjoys those times, but he's got too many times where he lapses back into his drunkenness, his violent behavior, and he beats on his wife, and it goes through that whole story. And they end up moving from the Northwest up to Alaska. And the whole idea was he wanted to start his life over. He wanted a chance to start over and get away from the man, basically get away from the government. And you get into that whole idea of the government's trying to keep him down and all of this. But it was all about going to Alaska to start this new life. And what this family quickly finds, is that way up north, when you have lack of sunlight, it gets super cold, you're pretty isolated. That does not always help your depression issues. As a matter of fact, it really acts as a stimulant to your depression. And his depression really feeds on that environment. It doesn't end up as good a situation as what he was wanting, but at the same time, it does end up as a good situation for the other two, as far as making friends and that kind of stuff. They probably are better off back in the lower 48 states, but they make things work. And anyway, it's a book about that. It's a book about love. What is love? But it also deals with domestic violence and stuff like that. And it's just, it was a very, very moving, touching book that I would highly recommend to anybody. I've praised this book all year, and I continue to do so. I hope to buy my own copy. I read my sister-in-law's copy. I hope to get that copy and maybe pick up another Kristen Hanna book and see if, do I like those other books, or was she a one-hit wonder for me? Now, the number one book all year, and I've seen this on the bookshelves, and I just had not picked it up, and I finally found it at the used bookstore. Got it for dirt cheap, and it was in brand new condition, hardback. Beautiful, beautiful book. And I ended up buying the entire series, the entire trilogy, and that was Ken Follett's The Fall of Giants. This is book 1 of the Century Trilogy. This, to me, folks, is the best fiction book I read all year. It is a big book. It totals out at 900 and, let's see, it was 985 pages, so it's a monster-sized book, but oh my gosh, it reads so fast. The storyline is so good. It's set in well, it's got multiple places it's set in. It's set in England, set in Germany, and set in Russia during World War I, like at the beginning, right, the very beginning, before the war starts, and then into the war, and then just as the war is ending. And it takes a couple different families, tells their, you follow their storylines, some of their family lines blend, and it covers anything from the war to the labor movement at that time period. It does a really good job talking about that. It talks about revolutionary Russia with the Bolsheviks and all of that upheaval that happened with communism coming in. I mean, it covers several different topics historically. So this is a great historical fiction book. I would highly recommend it. Best book I read all year. This year on my 2022 TBR list, I am intending to read book 2 of the series. All right, so those are my top 5 fiction books for the year 2021. I also wanted to just mention, when I was going through that list, I did not want to include any rereads, so all 5 of those are not from my reread list. I wanted to do books that were new to me this year, because like I reread Of Mice and Men, which I absolutely love, still love it. I reread Hatchet from when I was a little kid. I read some books that are classics for me, and I still absolutely love them, but I didn't want to include them because I wanted new books. And also I wanted to throw this out there that I really enjoyed the Theodore Boone series by John Grisham. It's a middle grade series about a kid lawyer and all of the stuff that happens to him, and he ends up being a lawyer for all his friends as a 12 or 13 year old. I can't remember how old he is, but really good series. It's a series I really want to push with my middle school kids. I think they would enjoy it. So throw that out there as a honorable mention. So, excuse me. Now we move on to the top 10 nonfiction books of the year 2021. Again, a couple of these are brand spanking new. They just came out, but also a couple of them are books that are, backlist, old stuff. Because as I said, I read used books primarily. So the number 10 on my top 10 nonfiction books list would be a buddy read that I did earlier in the year 2021 with Peg, and this was the Zealot and the Emancipator, John Brown, Abraham Lincoln, and the Struggle for American Freedom by H.W. Brands. It's kind of a darker colored cover, really pretty. It's got some really vibrant colors in there if you get real close, but this book would rank number 10, and basically it goes through, H.W. Brands takes us through the story of freeing the slaves through 2 different viewpoints. We got John Brown, who was very militant. He was, he used violence to get the job done. And then you got Abraham Lincoln, who wanted to find a more political way of doing it, a peaceful way. Now, I say peaceful. I am very aware that the Civil War happened on his watch. I get that. But if he had his choice, I believe he would have done it without the Civil War. He eventually comes to the conclusion that there had to be bloodshed. So they both end up in the end agreeing on that. But, one's from a militant point of view, one's from more of the political side of things. How do we legally get it done versus illegally getting it done? And pretty good look at it. It probably could have went into a lot more detail. H.W. Brands is one of my favorite authors. He tends to, in recent years, he has tended to start to move towards popular histories. And so it's less detail than what his older books used to be, but they're very readable. And there were some really good points that he came to some really good conclusions in the book, but the bulk of it is definitely for the vast majority of everybody else. Maybe not as much detail as we would have liked to have seen in our buddy read. So number 9 on the list. I don't have the book here. I believe it's upstairs. If you find it on the bookshelf behind me, do not laugh at me for not being able to find it. But it was American Caesar, and it was a biography by William Manchester that covered the life of Douglas MacArthur. And it was a big old chunky book. You've heard me talk about it throughout this year if you are a regular on the channel. And he did an excellent job, very, very thorough and pretty sympathetic towards Douglas MacArthur, I thought. So if you're wanting a complete history of Douglas MacArthur and everything he did during his career, I would recommend going and finding that book. For me, it was a little bit slower read. It was good. I would read it, and then I would get slowed down, and then I'd come back to it and read it, slowed down, come back to it. It took me a while to get through the book because I just did it in chunks, but it was good nonetheless. All right, number 8 is The Terrible Swift Sword by Bruce Catton. It is part of his Civil War trilogy. Highly recommend this book. I thought it was really good. I love Catton's writing on the Civil War. He's a good writer. His stuff, his prose flows very, very well, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. This one was about this one was the beginning of the war, wasn't it? This is book 1, I believe. Oh no, I better double check that before I say that. I think it was book 1 because I also read book 2 in the series. But anyway, I believe it's book 1. It might be book 2. Sorry, but it was really good covering the Civil War. As I said, I've read those first 2 books of the series, and this year I hope to maybe finish off that trilogy and get book 3 read. Book number 7 on the list was also a buddy read with Peg, and this is Eric Foner's A Short History of Reconstruction. Now, I am a member of Howard Zinn's website, and he looks at like a people's history of stuff. And this was one of the books that was offered for free from his website. If you, as a teacher, if you used his material to teach Reconstruction, or one of his lessons to teach Reconstruction. And I tried out that lesson, and it was very interesting. It definitely gives the African-American point of view and opens the eyes of kids. And so I got this book sent for free because I taught that lesson. Thank you to the website. And then also they did this big printout on how Reconstruction is not being taught properly in schools. It's not given enough time. And they actually used some of my comments that they asked us to do a short little write-up on how the lessons went, and they actually used some of my words in the final report. And so I got quoted in there. So that was kind of neat. I'd never had that done before. And then they ended up sending me another free book. Where did it go? Nope. Hang on. And then they sent me Paradise on Fire, and that's a fiction book. I plan on doing a book talk on this. I thoroughly enjoyed this. It's a middle grade book. But the website was very, very kind in what they offered. Getting back to number 7 on the list, but this is exactly what it says. It's a short history of Reconstruction. He has a much, much bigger volume that is a little bit more famous than this one. Eric Foner is a Civil War and slavery, Civil War, and Reconstruction historian, primarily slavery and Reconstruction, and thoroughly enjoy his work. But this basically goes through Reconstruction. It opened my eyes to a lot of stuff because in my classroom, I tend to get to the Civil War at the end of the school year, and then I am done because I just run out of time. And the kids, when they get to their freshman year in high school and they take that next American history class, either their freshman or sophomore year, they start with Reconstruction. So I know they start with a very short summary of the Civil War, and then they go into Reconstruction. So I know they're getting Reconstruction in their education. I run out of time, and I want to try to fix that. I at least want to try to do a little better job of hitting the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And this book is going to help me in that. I would recommend it if you're interested on Reconstruction. Now, it is probably not for the average reader. It's probably for someone who is more geared in history, and it's going to be a little bit slower paced book. So just kind of prepare you for that. But very worth reading. Number 6 on my list of top 10 nonfiction books was Our Team. And this was by Luke Eplin, and it's a story of baseball with the Cleveland Indians back in the 1950s. And it talks about integration of baseball, so talking about civil rights during that time period. It talks about the first African-American player to play in the American League. It talks about the Cleveland Indians owner and what he had to do to turn the franchise around and get them a World Series victory. Talks about Satchel Paige, talks about Larry Doby and Bill Veeck, and who's our fourth one? The Iowan, Bob Feller. And it takes those 4 people and how they turned around the Cleveland Indians, made them a winning squad at that time. And that was a library book. I don't have it in front of me. I am going to buy it when I see it at a used bookstore. It was awesome. Highly recommend that to all you baseball fans out there. All right, number 5 on my list was Lincoln at Cooper Union. Now, I could have swore I had this book on the shelf, and again, you might laugh at me and you might find it before I do. But this is it's a book by Harold Holzer, and basically Harold Holzer just takes us through the beginnings of when Abraham Lincoln is gearing up to run for the presidency, and he makes this pretty famous speech at the Cooper Union Institute in New York. And he goes through what it took to get invited, and then it takes you through the whole speech and how this really became one of the leading speeches for Lincoln. It's not leading speeches. It's one of his best speeches, but it becomes the springboard into the presidency is the argument he puts forth. And I just thought it was awesome. Anything Harold Holzer does is really, really good. He takes a complicated story and makes it pretty simple for everybody to understand without losing the details of history, without, I don't want to call it dumbing down, because he's still got all of the stuff in there. He just does such a good job of telling the story that everybody can understand it. So highly recommend Lincoln at Cooper Union by Harold Holzer. Number 4, this was a library book that I borrowed, but again, I hope to add it to my collection. This is Thaddeus Stevens by Bruce Levine. It was a biography that was put out, was it last year or was it the year before? It was either 2021 or 2020. I can't remember. I want to say 2021, really early, but I could be wrong on that. It might have been late 2020. But anyways, regardless, Thaddeus Stevens, of course, was an abolitionist from Pennsylvania, and he served in Congress during the antebellum period and then all through the Civil War and then into Reconstruction. And so he was really, he's one of the radicals in Congress who really turns everything around and makes it so that African Americans could not only be freed, but then could begin to get equality in the country. Of course, it was the beginning stages, so there's a ton of frustration with that, but he helped with the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. He dealt with the burr in everybody's saddle called Andrew Johnson. And anyway, Bruce Levine did an excellent job of telling the story so that the average person could understand it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And it's led me to want to dip into, I don't know if I have time this year, I hope to, but I don't know, but Fawn Brody's biography, which I have on the shelf over here on Thaddeus Stevens. I hope to dip into that sometime in the near future. All right, so let me get a drink here. Number 3 on the list of top 10 nonfiction books for 2021 for me was Wait Till Next Year by Doris Kearns Goodwin. And it basically took two of my favorite subjects, and she wrote a memoir around that. And that would be obviously history. So if you're looking at a memoir, it's looking at the history of that person's life. But it also intertwines it around the story of baseball, and in particular the Brooklyn Dodgers. And she grew up in the 1950s, late 40s and into the 1950s as she was a young girl growing up. And she tells about that time and what life was like living there. And it talks about all kinds of issues, civil rights. It talks about the integration of baseball. It talks about, of course, the Brooklyn Dodgers and their whole story, and fighting for the pennant with the New York Yankees and all the other clubs of the time period. But I just thought it was wonderful. I could not put it down. It was a very, very good read, and I appreciate her work in that. Number 2 on the list was one that I finished towards the end of the year. This was Thomas Jefferson, The Art of Power by John Meacham. This was also a buddy read. Buddy read this one with John David and Peg over at the History Shelf, and this was absolutely great. I loved it. Very fast-paced, very easy to understand. John Meacham is very sympathetic to Thomas Jefferson, so there are like the issue of slavery, I felt kind of got skirted around a little bit. He probably didn't hammer Jefferson as much as he should have, with Jefferson being, in my opinion, a little bit two-faced on, or a lot two-faced on just the issue of slavery. And if you're not familiar with history, Thomas Jefferson is our writer of the Declaration of Independence, and he said those very famous words about we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And he said, all men. And it's good to say something, but then you got to practice it. And, of course, he's also one of the largest slaveholders in the United States. And I thought that maybe Meacham skirted around that issue a little bit. But regardless, very good biography, very good reading, very fast-paced. I thought Meacham did an excellent job of covering what is really a vast lifetime of achievements. So I thought that was a really good book, one of the best biographies I've read. And then my number 1 book for the year 2021, this was a fairly new biography. It won the Pulitzer Prize. This is by David Blight, and you guys have heard me singing praises on this book ever since I started it a couple months back. It is Frederick Douglass, The Prophet of Freedom. Frederick Douglass is one of my heroes in American history. He's a very, very intriguing character. He was a former slave who ran away to freedom and then worked towards buying his own freedom, and worked as an abolitionist. He worked in the antebellum period. He worked throughout the Civil War, and then obviously clear into, was it 1890? Was it 18? I can't remember the year, but anyway, very late in the 19th century, he lived a full life and did quite a bit for civil rights and African Americans, and even with the helping women. He was an advocate of women's rights. And so I teach this in school right before my Civil War unit. We read his narrative of the life of an American slave, narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave. We read that every year, and I've been fully intrigued with this book. I've been wanting to read it, and I finally knocked it out this year, and it ended up as my number 1 nonfiction book of the year. Highly recommend that if you are interested in civil rights, in Civil War, that kind of stuff. Very, very good. So, BookTube, that is my year in review. Now, keep in mind these books on my top 10 list, they probably could be shuffled around in several different orders. That's just the order I came to. I don't know if it's absolutely set in stone, but all 10 books were really good. And I did leave a couple books off the list that were very good. So my reading year wasn't that bad. I read a lot more fiction this year because I got involved in some of the, the BookTube reading. I don't know if they're challenges, but I got involved in some of that, and then just watching your videos and your recommendations, they really kind of got my reading going a different direction. I don't know how 2022 is going to be. I hope to read nonfiction because that's my baby, but I've enjoyed the fiction stuff too. It's kept me going. So anyway, BookTube, I hope you enjoyed this year in review. It's been a wonderful time with all of you online. I really appreciate all of you, my viewers. I appreciate you following the channel, supporting the channel. So if you're new to this video, feel free, if you liked the video, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel because we do a whole lot of nonfiction on this channel. And then, like I said, some fiction on the side also. So thank you for watching. I hope everyone's having a wonderful, wonderful day and week. And yeah, so I look forward to 2022. If you read any of these books, let me know what you think. What you thought of them in the comments section below. So until next time, BookTube, happy reading.